Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in a little bit on the minute here. It's nice to see some familiar names hopping around from session to session. Welcome, everyone, to Developer Week Management 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, Marina Quintanilla, Director of Client Solutions Engineering at Foursquare. Welcome, Marina.
Thank you, Eric. Excited to be here today. 4 years ago, I joined Factual to lead a sales engineering team that was solving interesting problems in the location data space, building proof of concepts, but they were also responsible day to day for answering questions to the sales team, helping unblock them, and getting on the phone with our customers. So they were a team that was being pulled in multiple directions, being asked to, on one side, focus and solve hard problems, and on another side, be really responsive. When I started talking to the team, I could see that they were excited, but they were getting burnt out from the fire hose and sort of the difficulty they had managing those sort of two very different types of work. And stakeholders on their side really valued the team, but themselves were frustrated because they didn't understand how things were being prioritized, and they didn't necessarily know when they could expect something to be done. So they had a hard time managing expectations with their customers. So I asked myself, how can I create opportunities for focus, opportunities for balance, and for growth for my team in a service-oriented organization that has an inherent need for responsiveness? And what I focused on were really two areas, people and process. And there were two levers that I used to adjust those things. The first is listening, and the second is experimentation.
Hi, Marina. Sorry to interrupt, but I think you're muted.
Oh, did it mute the entire time, or did it?
No, you were fine up until now.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Until recently. Thank you for letting me know.
Not a problem.
Let me see, I'll jump back one slide. All right, so I was just introducing myself again. So I'm Marina. I lead an organization of support and solution engineers at Foursquare. And if you're not familiar with Foursquare, or if you haven't kept up with us over the years, we're a leading location data and technology platform company that works in the location space. So if you're interested in solving any of these problems, we're hiring. Check out our career site. We also have some really awesome APIs. If you're interested in working with location data, you can check out developer.foursquare.com. And we work with some great brands. So when I joined Foursquare through the merger between Factual and Foursquare 2 years ago, they asked me to create a brand new team. And once again, I was looking at a team that had to solve both hard problems, building custom solutions for our marquee clients, but also they were asking the team to do day-to-day technical support across our entire suite of products. And so once again, I had to look at how can I set this team up to be successful so that they, can focus on one side and solve long-term problems to help the team be more effective, as well as short-term problems, because a big part of their remit is really about being responsive and being able to move fast day to day. This is a problem I know many teams face, from IT and infrastructure, platform engineering teams, sales and solutions engineering teams. So if you're here, I hope that you'll find the session helpful and give you some ideas that you can take back and how to manage your team. If we take a step back and think about what it takes to build a high-performing interrupt-driven team, first I want to start with, I don't think there is any one solution that works for any one organization at all points in time. What I'm presenting to you today is really more of a framework and trying to give you a way of thinking about these problems and some of the ways that I've approached solving them. And I hope you'll take some of these ideas back to try for yourself. So as I mentioned, there's two areas I focus on. On one side, people, and on the other side, process. But you'll notice that this very circular slide here, because for me, this is all about continuous improvement. How do I, on one side, listen to my team, to the stakeholders that I support, that the team supports, to understand where we can improve and our friction points, and then take that to look at how we can experiment. What can we do to improve the way that we're working and better support the team and our stakeholders? And when I'm talking about people, I'm not just talking about hiring the right people, but also how do I set up the organization in a way that allows people to be successful? How am I defining the individual functions within the team and structuring the organization itself? Because that'll allow me to implement processes that can support people and help them do their job more effectively and have more focus, more opportunities for growth. And then on the other side, processes. So I'm going to talk to you today about some things that we've done and found success with in terms of intake and prioritization, defining SLAs so that you can manage expectations with your stakeholders, and more generally, how you communicate both within these processes, but also as you look to drive change and experiment. So the first thing is around how you structure your organization.
Do you have your slides up? Are you supposed to be sharing?
Yeah, did it turn that off too?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in just to make sure in case we went any further here.
Oh my goodness. All right, thank you.
Totally fine, don't worry about it. I'll let you know when they come back on.
Okay, all right.
There you go.
I'm gonna move some of my papers then. All right. So when you think about your org structure, for me, this was looking at how I can get away from, if you have like a jack of all trades in both of my teams, individuals are being asked to really do everything, and they had to have a really broad set of responsibilities. And so I wanted to look at how do I understand within the different responsibilities, common sets of skill proficiencies that I might be able to cluster and understand how I could break up that sort of one jack of all trades role into different roles. And that would allow me to set up processes and kind of start to create some separation in the team. I gotta go back to this one. So here's what that looks like. For me, this was about, you can see on sort of the rows looking at different skills, their SQL skills, maybe communication, programming. And then on one side, on the columns, I was able to group different responsibilities, and I could start to see, instead of, sort of one solutions engineer doing both support as well as designing solutions and eliciting requirements, I could actually look at creating a separate support engineering function from a solutions engineering function, which was, primarily focused on the heads down development and more like the automation and sort of harder technical problems, very different from troubleshooting and a role that, works back and forth with the customer a lot, or a solutions architect that is really eliciting requirements and focusing heavily on customers. And once I defined those functions, I needed to then think about how I might structure the team within the organization. And so I started to look at, in terms of where does the volume come in? I could start to break that up, for instance, by product or business unit. And that could help me understand, should I structure my team more based on a functional team or more based on business units? Initially, we actually started with functional teams. And what I found is there really wasn't enough knowledge sharing across the different products for the teams to really get sort of any added value and efficiency. And on the other side, we did find for supporting our stakeholders, we needed people to be talking across a product from one function to another. And so this was a good example. Well, first we tried one thing, and I talked to my team and sort of found that that wasn't quite working. And then we adjusted maybe a couple months later, and ended up moving more towards a business unit breakup. So definitely encourage you to be willing to try different things within your own organization. Other structures that I've seen work in other companies have been based on like customer tiers, for perhaps having, for instance, some groups focusing on, your tier ones, or maybe a team focusing on escalation, sort of separate from the regular group. So, look at the needs of your own organization and what can work. And the other thing that has been really helpful in this process is it's allowed me to have more of a shared language with my leadership to think about how many resources do we actually need to successfully meet the needs of the business and what they're asking this team to do. And so it's been really helpful for headcount planning discussions as well. And then the last piece when I think about people is, of course, having the right people. So in addition to all those technical skills that, of course, we're interviewing for and looking at our team for, in any service-oriented team, it's also extremely important to have people who have the right soft skills. On one side, who care about stakeholders, who can elicit empathy, and whether they have themselves worked in that function or not, that they truly care, because at the end of the day, our team is really about unblocking other people. And so caring is really important. The second thing is that they are an effective communicator. They need to be able to speak the language of the stakeholders, or you're just going to have a lot of back and forth and confusion. And that's going to create escalations for you, and you're going to end up spending a lot of your time on coaching. So communication skills are extremely important. And then the last piece is I really look for people who exhibit curiosity, because we don't have product managers, program managers who are taking in our requests and turning them into stories, requirements for the team to act on. We need to be able, as individuals, to read in those requests, act on them immediately, ask the right questions, know how to state our assumptions, right, and provide information back to stakeholders. So knowing what questions to ask, not taking something at face value, but knowing kind of when to dig in is really important. All right, so the sort of second half is around processes, right? I wanted to share some of the things that we've tried in terms of intake and prioritization. The first piece is, if you don't have a ticketing system, I think that is really the foundation. I highly recommend one that is built for a service use case, whether you're using Service Desk, which you see here, we're on Zendesk, Asana, a lot of those. They're going to have the functionality like setting up SLAs so that you can measure KPIs that are relevant in a service-oriented team. And they're also going to allow you to create forms so that you can actually ask your stakeholders to give the information that your team needs to immediately act on a request, and reduce some of that back and forth. And that's going to allow your team to be much happier. The other thing I'd recommend is, if your team, like mine, also has project work that they're doing, things that are a bit more longer term, I actually put that in a completely separate project, because in my case, I don't care how fast they're moving with that type of work. I'm more focused on predictability, on understanding how much of that work we can commit to over a month or over a quarter, and kind of prioritizing and thinking about what are the projects that are most impactful. And so I put that work in a different project. In our case, we do sprint planning for that work, whereas for the service-oriented work, we're picking it up immediately as it's coming in. Two other things that have helped us, as you think about intake, think about, do you have people in your team that any one person can do intake and sort of classify any of the tickets coming in and act on them? If so, and we have some products like this, we found an on-call rotation to be really helpful in a way to, when you're not on call, be able to focus on that project work. And when you are on call, you're really focusing on intake. In other cases, it requires sort of a small group, if you will, to do that intake, because there's not enough knowledge across the board and kind of higher complexity. In that case, we have a daily triage meeting, which has multiple folks. On one of the products, we actually bring in someone representing the stakeholders, and classify the tickets, look at, do we have all the information we need to move forward on this? And we bucket it according to whether it's urgent, something that is fast, or sort of everything else. And this is also a place where we can talk about escalations, as well as, are there any issues that we've seen coming up from sort of multiple people? Do we think this is something we need to start to sound the alarms on? And then agreeing on daily priorities. Because if you're in a team where there's sort of more coming at the team than the team can really keep up with, then having agreed upon priorities has been a really great way to make sure there's alignment with stakeholders on what we're focusing on. And then another thing, so I talked about these sort of swim lanes, or how we classify tickets. So fast are the tickets that, for us, very straightforward, the sort of tasks that we can do very quickly. These are the ones that we've told stakeholders we will work on getting these out within 1 business day. And so we have a time block that every day we're going to work on those and get through them. Urgent are the ones that have been escalated that we want to make sure we're focusing on, and we have set time blocks within the day to work on those. But then we also have time blocks for normal, because what we found is we can't only work on urgent issues. We need to make sure the day-to-day requests are also, getting through, even if they're moving at like a lower velocity, for instance. And this was an interesting one, because when someone made this suggestion, one of our stakeholders, I'm like, this sounds like micromanaging the team. I don't think they're going to like it. But I was in a position where I really needed to take that feedback and implement and do something with it. I wanted to make sure the stakeholder felt that they were being listened to, and they had success with this in another team. So I was able to set it up really as an actual experiment. We did this for 4 weeks, talked to the team, decided we're going to try it, and then we're going to go to our on-site in 4 weeks and think about what worked and what didn't work. And at the end of the day, the team actually found that this was ultimately helpful, but they did find that it was a little bit too controlling of their day, and it didn't provide them the flexibility they needed. And so ultimately they decided, I'm going to, as an individual, make sure I have set time blocks within my day. But instead of us all working and having the same time block every day, people would schedule it whatever kind of worked for them. All right, now let's look at SLAs. So SLAs is something that I get really excited about, both when I joined Factual as well as Foursquare. This is one of the first things I did in each of those organizations. And I did it because SLAs, whether they're contractual or not, are a great way to manage expectations with your stakeholders. And if you can manage their expectations, they're not going to be DMing your team directly throughout the day, asking for updates. Did you see this? Can you give me an update on that? When do you think this will be done? Or coming to you directly, do you know what's going on with this? Instead, if you can agree on how long they should expect before requests are acknowledged, right? How long, how frequently they can expect updates, for instance, then they'll be more likely to wait, especially when they see that you and your team are actually doing those things that you agreed to. Similarly, if you can set expectations for how long different types of tasks are taking and how long they can expect, then they can themselves, let customers know, here's how long you can expect. This is going to take 1 week, or this is, 2-day requests. And in that case, you'll get a sort of lower volume of being pinged, and your team is happier because now they can focus and actually get the work done. When you're coming up with SLAs, things to keep in mind, if there is a big gap between what your stakeholders are telling you they need for the SLAs to be successful and what your team can achieve, especially when you start to work in things like PTO, the room they need to breathe and cross-train, for instance, and have work-life balance. Work with your stakeholders to figure out how you bridge that gap over time. You want to advocate for your team, but you also want to sort of show them, the types of improvements you're thinking about, or, headcount asks, things like that can help you bridge that gap and improve your SLAs over time. And then the last part for me is really about how I communicate as a leader, both when I'm thinking about the change that I want to create in the organization, and then also sort of day-to-day in terms of intake and prioritization. So the first piece is that I think it's really important to be intentional and consider the communication preferences of your stakeholders. What I mean by this is understanding when the people that you're supporting prefer to receive information that they can digest in their own time, where maybe email, for instance, like broad blasts to share priorities is a good solution. In other places, they want to have more of a voice in the process. And so, office hours, one-on-ones will give them the ability to share that feedback directly with you. And then when you're putting together your SLAs, when you're thinking about different experiments within the team to improve how the team is working, think about who and how to involve in that process. In some cases, there may be people in your team that are looking for, leadership and growth opportunities that you can ask them to, for instance, build out that proposal and give them an ability to contribute and come up with that. You may not have, in your case, all of the subject matter expertise to come up with a proposal. And so in that case, I found working groups to be really successful and involving a lot of people. And other times I worked in organizations where everyone's really busy. They have a lot of other priorities, and it makes more sense for me to build out a proposal to 70 or 80% and then to solicit that for review. But ultimately, considering the people most impacted by change is going to help you, because once you identify those people, you can make sure to involve them earlier and more frequently to get their feedback and understand how it affects them, and adjust those proposals, for instance, or talk to them about, if they're not bought in, here's the time we're going to do this experiment for, give it a try, things like that. So that's sort of everything. As a reminder, I think it's really important to think about your team in terms of how do you continuously improve. And so reevaluating, whether it's monthly or quarterly, use your one-on-ones, use the data that you're able to collect about how the team is doing to sort of understand and find the friction points and think about where you can improve. And then use that information to actually experiment, whether it's with how you structure the team or the processes that you're using, both to divide up work or to work directly with your stakeholders. So I know there's been some things coming in on the chat, so I'm going to look over there now for questions. Let's see. How do you manage the skill matrix and apply those metrics across functional teams? So I think this question, when I think about that, and let me know if I'm right, for me is, I use this matrix to come up with functions. And then for me, it was, okay, I have support engineers, but some of them are actually working on different parts of the business. And so I could set up teams in that way. I don't know if that helps. Apply those metrics across functional teams. So actually what you might be thinking of is, in terms of KPIs, support engineers are going to have different metrics, if you will, than a solutions engineer. That might be more of what the question was. In that case, that gets closer to the reason I divide up project work, because the support engineers are really responsible primarily for intake. And so responsiveness, reopen rates, those are the KPIs that are helping me understand if they're moving fast enough, if we're meeting our SLAs with our stakeholders. For solutions engineers, I'm much more looking at, code quality, things like that, like how often we are, in our case, we're delivering data. So how often do we have to redeliver data because something incorrect was delivered? And are we delivering on time? Let me see. Do those metrics carry over for a support system? I am not sure. For incident management, I think in some cases, like response rate, acknowledgement, how frequently you provide updates, I think those are all very relevant for incident management as well. And there's definitely some tools that help collect that information and put those reports together for you. All right, let's see another question. For a team that wants to start this, how do you recommend handling the backlog of existing issues? I think it depends maybe on how big that backlog is, but some balancing perhaps what makes sense for you. If there's a lot of older stuff, they probably weren't that important and you can start to get rid of them even if they are bugs. It's a sad truth. So it may be looking at recency, and especially for more recent stuff, actually prioritizing and looking at, what the impact of some of those bugs are. See if you can figure out which ones are maybe more important to handle. I think this is where you look at what the needs of the business are. Are there areas that the company is investing in more, that maybe fixing bugs in that area are going to be more impactful than fixing bugs of a system maybe that, I don't know, isn't used as heavily. All right. Well, thank you so much. Let's see, were there any other? Yeah, I think that's everything. Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm just going to put this one back up as well. If you enjoyed this talk and are interested in location data, definitely look at Foursquare's career page. We're hiring and it's a really great place to work. We also have some really awesome APIs if you are interested in building any applications with location data. And I hope this was valuable. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy Developer Week.
Thank you so much, Marina. It was a pleasure having you today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. It was a pleasure having you. Please feel free to hop on over to the Session and Open Talks tab over on the left-hand side of your screen. We're going to have some more talks starting in about 4 minutes here. So hope you all are enjoying the conference, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you, Marina.
Thanks, Eric.